Hi, I'm Anthony Russo.
And I'm Joe Russo, and we're here with Vanity Fair to break down some scenes from our career.
I like this. This is sort of like the pensieve. We're going to look into the past.
Yes, let's conjure up an old Marvel film.
Wakanda forever!
I am inevitable.
I still marvel at the technology that, they were able to use to capture Brolin's performance. It might be one of my favorite performances of anyone we've ever worked with because of, the way Josh understood the assignment of, playing a character. It's almost kabuki in a way. You remember the first time we were in rehearsals with him, and we had a screen in the corner, and we were mapping Thanos onto him, and he was walking around in those motion capture pajamas. And I remember him just getting so excited that he could make this character that was 8.5 feet tall move,
I remember what
bring
he
it
said.
to life.
He said, I feel like I'm studying acting again as a kid because it was so experimental. It was such a new form of performance he had never experienced before. It's basically puppeteering. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mr. Brolin, his chin looks nothing like this in reality. This is all
absolutely nothing.
And I am Iron Man.
I don't know if we've told this story in its entirety.
and certainly not while watching the scene.
It's probably the most pressure we've ever had in trying to come up with a line with Marcus McFeely in any of these movies. You do not want to fuck up Tony Stark's last line.
Part of the pressure came from Jon Favreau, who called us up after he read the script.
I remember this.
And said to us, "Are you guys really going to kill Iron Man?"
He did. And I remember pacing on the corner of a stage on the phone with Favreau trying to talk him off a ledge because you can't do this. It's going to devastate people, and you don't want them walking out of the theater and into traffic. We did it anyway.
Yeah, we did anyway, and to John's credit, he hadn't stepped through the process in the way that we had, so we would have had the same reaction if somebody had... We
felt like we had earned the arc that, would feel redemptive and emotional and uplifting and hopeful, even though he had sacrificed his life. So he actually asked to improvise a few lines here. We tried some alternate versions of it, and they were sort of more in this snarky Tony Stark vein. He wasn't playing it with enough pain of the power of the stone surging through his body.
In fact, the edit that we ended up settling on in that version was a version where he said nothing.
We redid this 3 times. Third time's the charm.
Our editor, Jeff Ford, who is one of the most amazing filmmakers we've ever collaborated with, edited the first Iron Man movie. So he had been on the journey with the character since the original Jon Favreau directed Iron Man.
He hit play, and Thanos says, "I am inevitable," and then beat, 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 and Jeff went, "And I am Iron Man."
And we were
we were like, stop the Avid.
I was like, we were struck by
What did you just say?
Say?
We called Downey. We said, you got to put the suit back on. He had already said goodbye to the character twice now.
Right, so that pickup that we did with Robert was at a stage in Los Angeles that was directly across from the stage where he originally auditioned for the role of Iron Man. To make the whole thing even more emotionally
devastating for Robert, we asked him to put the suit on, come back to where he had originally secured the role, and to give his final line as the character
once again.
This is from the Battle of Wakanda, Infinity War.
We better keep him in front of us.
How do we do that?
We open the barrier. This will be the end of Wakanda.
Then it will be the noblest ending in the history.
Sometimes I think about the scale of all these scenes, and I don't know how we're still standing.
I don't know either.
And how we did all of this.
Yeah, we storyboard extensively. A sequence like this is impossible because the amount of people required to create a scene like this is in the hundreds. And some of those people are going to be present on your production, and some of those people are going to be located on the other side of the planet working in visual effects studios. So the only way to communicate the idea of the scene to that wide range of people is to create a very specific model of what the scene is going to be.
An animatic.
Sometimes it includes moments of what we call fight viz, where we actually shoot stunt people fighting in the stunt gym to sort of stand in for certain moments within the pre-visualization. And it's an incredibly elaborate roadmap that we revise and we revise and revise over many months before we get to production. It's kind of like making the movie before you make the movie.
They were making Black Panther while we were shooting Infinity War, and they were on a process of discovery with Ryan Coogler. Anthony and I went to visit Ryan early in prep, and it was the most impressive prep we had ever seen for a film. He had every wall covered with the structure of Wakanda, the culture of Wakanda. It was so dense and so detailed. We were completely blown away. I remember walking out of that room going, that movie's going to be absolutely incredible. And I remember Chadwick taking Anthony and I aside and explaining to us the mythology that they had been developing.
We had a depth of relationship with Chadwick because we introduced the character with him in Civil War. And he was basically the ambassador for everything that had been done after that movie with Ryan Coogler. He would go off and work with some of the other actors on the sort of Wakandan formation, the Wakandan chant.
Stunt players who were not in Black Panther, and he would take them through the chants, how to pronounce it correctly, the diction, the form that they would take, how they would hold their body in an attack stance.
He was being the leader of Wakanda.
It's one of my favorite shots in the movie, seeing the scale of the army coming down the hill. Tricky sequence to shoot because we had the Hulkbuster in it.
These costumes look amazing, but they are designed to look amazing. They aren't necessarily something you would wear to compete in the Olympics or a sporting event. So to have all these actors have to sprint full speed to get them to hit their marks on the shots. I always felt an immense amount of power in the scene in the sense that like Earth's last stand would unfold in Wakanda, this country that had sectioned itself off from the rest of the world and now literally was carrying the fate of the world in its hands.
Yeah, it was a resonant experience as filmmakers to execute the scene, and even more resonant now.
Evans is like an Olympic athlete.
He really is. He is very quick. And a lot of times we thought we would have to augment him or use camera tricks to increase his speed as Cap, and we were always stunned that we didn't need to do that.
Yeah. This is from Captain America Civil War. The two sides of the Avengers who've been divided by the Sokovia Accords are finally going to confront one another.
What do we do, Cap?
We fight.
This is gonna end well.
This movie is brutalist in tone. It's meant to be devoid of color. The whole idea behind it was all these characters were slipping into this morally gray area. They didn't understand their identities. They were in conflict with one another. And so we wanted to use a location where, civilians wouldn't be running away while they were fighting each other. We didn't feel like they could recover from that. So we chose an airport tarmac.
They're not stopping.
Neither are we.
What's interesting is that we shot this on the back lot of sound stages in Atlanta. And I remember we took the temperature of the blacktop, and it was 128 degrees on the blacktop. So all of the ground you're seeing here is the blacktop. Everything else back here is all CG, right? None of that exists. When they ran at each other, this side, there's no CG characters on this side. So these are the only two real characters on this side. Spider-Man is CG, Iron Man is CG, Vision, War Machine. It was Scarlett literally running by herself with a stunt player in 128 degree blacktop over and over. I remember her looking at us at one point and going, we can't do this one more time. There's certain actors who could escape from having to do a sequence like this over and over. Sebastian could not, Renner could not, Scarlett could not, Mackie takes flight, Lizzie takes flight, and Rudd, of course, is completely covered.
And I remember having long conversations, agonizing with our visual effects supervisor, Dan DeLue, because as Iron Man takes off in War Machine, their suits are so heavy. And this is the kind of physics that we break down and use in order to construct how people move.
Right.
We have an estimated weight of both of these suits, so we can figure out how they move. In order for these guys to fly, they have to be moving at a much higher velocity, or they will just fall out of the air like a stone. But we needed to compress them into a single shot, so we got this nice running shot here. This is one of those moments where we cheated on physics, you know. Admittedly, we cheat on physics.
They had thrusters in their hands.
That was the compromise. Is we kept the hands down for a little bit, but then he eventually has to transition here. This is what we spend months about in the edit room talking about.
There was a moment where we had Bettany on wires outside in that heat, and that suit doesn't have any seams in it. I think we were probably at risk of him getting heat stroke once or twice. You remember this one?
Yeah, I can never
He
forget
lifted his arm once, and a hole popped in one of the seams, and it just started squirting sweat out like it was like a stream of water coming out of his suit. And I remember we just called cut and we're like, you gotta get out of that suit. You probably
this is dangerous.
You probably have 3 pounds of body weight and sweat inside your suit at this point.
Safety is always the top concern, but what happens is you get lost in the moment. Everybody was so excited to be shooting this scene. Like every crew member is a massive fan of these characters, a massive fan of the comics. So the opportunity to actually stage a scene like this on camera was so overwhelming to people. We had people on set that day crying when they saw
because they had read the books as a kid, as we had, and we probably had 30 people behind us all trying to get a peek of all of these characters running at each other.
It was easy to get lost in the moment of what we were doing.
You got hard, kid. Where you from?
Queens?
Brooklyn.
Some people are lucky, like Evans. And once he puts the helmet on, it's a stunt player. Robert, I think the reason that he played Iron Man for a decade is because he never really had to go to set. As soon as Iron Man suited up, Robert was gone.
And Michael's big moment finally came.
I give you the new CEO for the Bluth Company.
This is from the pilot of Arrested Development, where Michael realizes that he no longer wants to be a Bluth.
My favorite Bluth. And the sexiest creature I have ever laid eyes on.
The style of Arrested Development and where we derived it. Anthony and I were big fans of a film that had won the Cannes Film Festival called Man Bites Dog, which is a satirical look at a serial killer. It's a mockumentary. A camera crew follows him around. It's a wickedly funny and disturbing movie, but it was shot verite, and the style of Arrested Development owes an incredible debt to that movie. We added some more flourishes to it, to create some more snap zooms, to get into characters' heads a little bit more, to get into close-ups.
Yeah. Joe and I like sort of mixing tones. It's part of how we sort of find sort of freshness and oddness in material for ourselves. Part of our inclination to go to the style Joe's talking about here is the show is so absurd, Arrested Development. So we thought it would be fun to commit to a camera style that says to an audience instinctually hardcore realism, naturalism, reality TV.
Reality TV was big at the time, so we felt like they would understand the language of what this was.
My lovely wife, Lucille.
There's a lot of really diverse coverage in this sequence. It's because we would run 3 cameras all at once.
One of the techniques we used, again, to create a feeling of realism is we wouldn't let the camera operators watch rehearsals, so that we would just throw them in there as we were ready to shoot, so they weren't prepared. They didn't know exactly where things were going to happen. They had
That's
to
where
find
we got
it.
some of our best footage is, an operator catching up to a subject. In a shot like this, There's probably a camera operator hiding just off over here. There's probably one more over here. This shot here, me and 2 other operators shooting run and gun on digital cameras. This is the first show, a narrative show, I think in TV history, because we're just at a point where that technology had become good enough. We also didn't have to light as much. You can tell if you look at like how much definition you're losing out of these windows back here. It's because this was an earliest version of a digital camera which could not retain as much information.
The problem with digital video at the time was that it didn't look as good. It didn't function as well as film. And people were scared of it. But we wanted to embrace it for the show because we were trying to lower the cost of the show, number one. Number two, we felt that the fact that the image was degraded and imperfect fed the realistic feel of it. It was not a polished show. It was not lit perfectly. It felt like you were capturing something that was just happening and not recreating something.
Sorry, it's not the right time.
We came into conflict with the studio over our shooting style. So these operators over here on the edges of the frame, this camera might pan right or left and shoot right through an operator on its way to get coverage of another actor. In editorial, we were just going to chop that piece out. We're doing this because we were moving so quickly. We had 60 location changes in a 5-day shoot. It was completely insane. But we remember getting a phone call on like day 2 of it. And I remember the head of the studio wanted to fire us because she said we had no idea what we were doing because she kept watching dailies and seeing other cameras in the shots.
She said, this stuff is never going to cut together. What are you doing? In her defense, it was very chaotic. We're like, trust us, trust us, trust us. We know what we're doing.
So this is from an episode of Community. It was a 2-part paintball episode.
Shirley, what are we supposed to do?
How about we save this school's ass?
Deal.
These were the episodes that Kevin Feige watched, which inspired him to call us and ask us if we were interested in making a Captain America movie. Anthony and I, growing up as film geeks, as film fans, who obsessed over and watched everything that you could possibly watch. We had a very diverse range of interests, from old movies to new movies to video games to fantasy films to comedies to Gilligan's Island. Like, you name it, we consumed it. Tolkien. We played Dungeons and Dragons. So go down the list of influences. Community was us playing in a sandbox, expressing those influences, making fun of action films while we're embracing them. You'll see there, we went through a series of shots of a golf cart as if it were a vehicle from the Fast and Furious, with an insert of the accelerator, the tires spinning out, the car pulling away from us at speed. So here's an homage to John Woo right here. We've got guns facing in different directions, 2 characters, almost back to back. But that was part of the inspiration. Justin Lin shot that first paintball episode, and he used Woo quite a bit. Justin is a dear friend of mine who went to film school with me. We're in the same class together at UCLA.
Watch it! Oh! That's it. Is that it? I think that's it. We win! We win!
If that music feels Marvel-esque in any way, it's because the composer on the show was a young gentleman named Ludwig Göransson, who ultimately went on to score Black Panther and become a very prominent big movie composer, as well as a producing partner to Childish Gambino. But what's amazing about Community is the amount of characters. Those episodes were mostly 22 minutes long, but if you count up here the amount of characters that were lead or recurring that were important to the story in this one. I mean, it was crazy. The scale of the ensemble that we would have to juggle from episode to episode, make sure each character got their moments. And I think this is really where our penchant for handling Infinity War and Endgame began. You can trace the roots directly to this ridiculous shot from Community.
The Greendale Community College Avengers.
That's right.
That's what we called them. Yeah. This is in The Gray Man. The title character, played by Ryan Gosling, is on a cargo plane being transported by a crew of mercenaries, and these mercs are going to be given the order to kill him.
I think they've already begun. We filmed the movie for about 5 to 6 months, and we reshot this sequence about 4 times over the course of making the film. We have a very iterative process when it comes to action. We like to execute an idea, cut it together, look at it, come up with a better idea, execute it again. And so when we initially shot, and I don't want to give any spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching. But when we initially shot this sequence, it was supposed to be on a contained plane, and the cargo door was supposed to open, and Ryan and another character were supposed to fall out while they were fighting. We went from a more contained fight inside the plane to a spectacular plane crash sequence.
So the concept of the scene is you're in a confined space, you're in the air, there's nowhere to flee, there's nowhere to run, and it's one person against a gang of mercs. You know, here, and here,
over here.
And the Gray Man is here in the center. The problem here is, how is he going to survive one person against many? We had to come up with all these ideas about how he could possibly use whatever is in his environment to preserve his life.
To obfuscate, create obstacles for his pursuers.
This technique here, he opens up a smoke grenade and it gives him a little bit of an edge to keep going.
So after blowing a hole in the plane, he makes his way to an oxygen mask, which is just off camera over here. He knows that the pilots are going to be forced to take evasive action, which is going to include diving, which will send everyone into a weightless free fall. And he knows he needs to get a hold of that oxygen before they take that action.
Now, the inventive techniques that the Gray Man uses to preserve his life in this scenario, we came up with a lot of these through consultation with CIA consultants that we had, Special Forces consultants that we had, and they have training and real-world experience about having to use elements in your environment. That was the basic concept of this scene, the Gray Man sort of improvising with things around him.
So all the atmospherics that you're seeing throughout here is CG. This is one of the more heavily CG sequences. This is not something you can replicate on a real plane with putting actors or stunt players in danger. This scene was very meticulous, especially difficult because Anthony and I kept changing our minds and we kept blowing up the scale of the scene bigger and bigger with each iteration, each pass that we took at the scene.
The CG work in the scene was so difficult and complex that it, in fact, shots in this scene were the very last shots that we finished on the movie. They took the longest.
Thank you guys. That was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was very fun. Sorry we went on and on, but we can't shut up.